Jimin almost leaves without turning his head. Jungkook's voice calls his name, and everything cracks broken megaphone. A single call stops Jimin from leaving forever as Jungkook's voice shatters silence, exposing love, guilt, and a secret that can't stay buried. Jimin, don't! Jungkook's voice tore through the corridor like glass breaking under a sudden scream, and Jimin froze with his hand already on the exit bar, breath caught between leaving and turning back. The hallway behind the stage smelled of cold metal, sweat and fatting smoke, the kind that lingered after lights went dark and applause died too quickly. Jimin had learned to walk fast in places like this, to move as if the past couldn't reach him if he didn't look back. His shoulders were squared, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the emergency sign glowing green like a promise of escape. He had counted his steps, 12 to the door, 4 more to the stairwell, a clean break. He had practiced not turning his head. Then his name happened. Not shouted for the crowd, not dressed in melody. It was raw, cracked, the way Jungkook's voice sounded when fear slipped past discipline. The sound hit Jimin's spine first, then his chest, then settled somewhere dangerous and warm behind his ribs. His fingers loosened. The door didn't open. He hated that his body knew that voice better than his mind wanted to admit. "Don't do this," Jungkook said again, closer now. Jimin could hear the uneven rhythm of his steps, the hitch in his breath he'd learned to recognize during late-night rehearsals when Jungkook pushed too hard. "Not like this." Jimin closed his eyes for a beat. When he opened them, the green sign blurred. He turned. Jungkook stood 10 feet away, hair damp, collar crooked, eyes too bright under the fluorescent lights. He looked like someone who had sprinted through a storm and expected to be struck again at any second. In his hand was a phone, screen lit with a message Jimin didn't need to read to know what it said. Rumors had a way of arriving before explanations. "I said I was done," Jimin said quietly. He kept his voice level because if it rose, if it cracked, the wall he'd built would crumble. "I said I couldn't." He stopped himself, a habit born of years of swallowing words before they became weapons. Jungkook shook his head. "You said you were tired. You didn't say goodbye." Jimin's mouth twitched. A smile tried to exist and failed. "Goodbyes are just lies we tell ourselves to make leaving easier." "That's not true," Jungkook said. "You know it's not." The corridor hummed. Somewhere, a door slammed. Jimin felt the vibration through the soles of his shoes and remembered other nights, other halls, other silences. He remembered the first time he learned how to disappear in plain sight, how to fold pain into performance until the audience mistook it for passion. "You shouldn't have followed me," Jimin said. "This isn't your mess." Jungkook laughed, sharp and breathless. "Everything about you has been my mess for a long time." The honesty stung. Jimin turned his face away, studying a crack in the wall like it might offer a better answer. He felt the old fear rise, the one that whispered that if he stayed, he would ruin everything, that if he left, he would ruin himself. "You heard what they're saying," Jimin said. "About the rehearsal footage, about the argument, about me." He swallowed. "About us." Jungkook took another step forward and stopped, respecting a distance they had learned the hard way. "I heard lies stitched together with half-truths," he said. "I heard fear wearing a megaphone." "And you think your voice fixes that?" Jimin asked. "No," Jungkook said, "but it fixes this." He tapped his chest once, then looked up, eyes steady. "If you walk out without looking back, it fixes nothing. It just makes the silence louder." Jimin's hands curled at his sides. He thought of the habit he'd picked up in the last year, counting breaths when panic threatened to drown him, pressing his thumb to the faint scar on his palm to remind himself he was still here. He thought of Jungkook's habit too, the way he hummed when nervous, the way he stayed late to run a sequence again because perfection felt safer than rest. "You don't know what it costs me to stay," Jimin said. Jungkook nodded slowly. "Then tell me." The words hovered, heavy. Jimin felt the room tilt as if the building itself leaned in to listen. He took a breath and let the memory surface, uninvited but necessary. The night the pressure finally fractured him, the way he smiled through a performance while his thoughts spiraled, the meeting afterward where decisions were made in low voices without his consent. The promise he'd made to himself in a bathroom mirror that he would never let himself be cornered again. They want control, Jimin said. They always do, and He stopped, jaw tight. I don't trust myself not to break if I stay where they can reach me. Jungkook's gaze softened, something protective flaring there. You don't break, he said. You bend until you're exhausted. There's a difference. Tell that to the headlines. Tell that to me, Jungkook said. Let me carry it with you. Jimin laughed, and this time it was bitter. You already carry too much. You always have. Because I choose to, Jungkook said, voice low. Because when you almost leave without turning your head, something in me cracks, and I don't want to be the kind of person who lets that happen without speaking. Silence stretched, not empty but full, like the pause before a storm breaks. Jimin searched Jungkook's face for calculation and found none. Just fear, just resolve, just the truth laid bare in a place where lies had grown too comfortable. Why now? Jimin asked. Why your voice? Jungkook swallowed. Because if I didn't call your name, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering who I could have been if I had. The words landed softly and hard all at once. Jimin felt something inside him give, not a collapse, but a release. He stepped away from the door. The green light no longer felt like an answer. I can't promise I won't run, Jimin said. Jungkook's shoulders eased just a fraction. I'm not asking for promises, he said. I'm asking you to stay tonight. Jimin nodded. He didn't trust his voice yet. He took one step toward Jungkook, then another, until the space between them was small enough to feel warm. He reached out without thinking and caught Jungkook's sleeve, grounding himself in the familiar texture of fabric and pulse. Next time, Jimin said softly, call my name sooner. Jungkook smiled, relief and something brighter flickering across his face. I always will. They stood there a moment longer, two figures in a quiet corridor, the echo of a voice still hanging in the air like a promise kept. Jimin didn't leave, and for the first time in a long while, staying felt less like surrender and more like choosing to live with the cracks. Light finding its way through. The door closed behind them with a soft, dangerous click, and the silence that followed felt louder than the crowd ever had. Jimin walked first, slower now, his footsteps no longer measured for escape but for restraint. The backstage room they entered was dim, lit by a single lamp left on like someone had forgotten hope there. The air smelled of dust and cold coffee. Jungkook leaned against the wall, eyes never leaving Jimin, as if looking away might make him disappear again. You shouldn't have said my name like that, Jimin said at last, his voice low, controlled, but trembling at the edges. You know what it does to me. Jungkook's jaw tightened. And you shouldn't walk away like you're already dead. Jimin turned sharply. You think this is easy? His composure cracked, just a hairline fracture, but it was enough. You think I wanted to leave everything I built with my own blood and breath. I leave because staying is killing me. Jungkook pushed off the wall. No, you leave because you think you have to suffer alone to be strong. The words landed hard. Jimin laughed once, sharp and humorless. Don't psychoanalyze me now. I'm not, Jungkook shot back. I'm angry. That surprised them both. Jungkook ran a hand through his hair, packing. I'm angry because every time things get ugly, you disappear behind that perfect smile and call it protection. For who? Me? The team? Or just your fear of being seen when you're not okay? Jimin's eyes darkened. You don't get to say that. I do, Jungkook said, stepping closer. Because I'm the one who hears you breathing differently when the lights go out. I'm the one who knows when your jokes are armor. And I'm the one who stood there tonight thinking I was about to lose you without a fight. The room felt smaller. Jimin looked away, shoulders tense, fingers digging into his own wrist like an anchor. If you knew everything, he said quietly, you wouldn't want me to stay. Jungkook didn't hesitate. Try me. Jimin closed his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was stripped bare. They told me I was replaceable, that the narrative would survive without me, that if I caused trouble, I'd become the problem instead of the product. Jungkook felt something cold settle in his chest. Who said that? It doesn't matter, Jimin replied. What matters is that I believed them, and when I start believing things like that, I become dangerous to myself. The confession hung heavy between them. Jungkook stepped forward, close enough now to feel Jimin's warmth, his unsteady breath. "You're not replaceable," he said fiercely. "Not on stage, not here." He tapped Jimin's chest just once. "And if they make you feel like that again, they answer to me." Jimin opened his eyes, startled. "You can't fight everything for me." "I'm not fighting for you," Jungkook said. "I'm fighting with you." For a moment, Jimin looked like he might crumble. His voice softened, almost broken. "That's what scares me." "Why?" "Because if I let you stay this close," Jimin whispered, "losing you would destroy me." Jungkook's expression changed then, something deep and resolute settling in. "Then don't lose me. Don't push me away before I choose to leave." The words were intimate, dangerous, charged with everything they'd never said out loud. The silence between them burned. "You're reckless," Jimin murmured. Jungkook smiled faintly, only with things that matter. A sudden knock shattered the moment. Both of them froze. "Jungkook, Jimin," a voice from outside, sharp, professional. "We need you now." Jimin's shoulders stiffened again, the mask threatening to slide back into place. Jungkook caught his wrist before he could retreat. The touch was brief, electric. "Don't disappear," he said under his breath. "Not again." Jimin looked down at their joined hands, then back up. His eyes were wet but steady. "Stay close," he replied. "If I start to fall back into it, don't let me lie." Jungkook nodded. "I won't." They released each other and stepped back into the hallway, faces composed, hearts anything but. The light seemed harsher now, the whispers louder, the stakes clearer. Jimin walked beside Jungkook this time, not ahead, not behind. And though the world outside waited with judgment, pressure, and knives hidden in smiles, something had shifted. He hadn't left. And Jungkook had found his voice just in time. The room they were led into was colder than the hallway, a glass-walled conference space overlooking the darkened stage like an interrogation chamber pretending to be professional. Jimin felt it immediately, the way his spine straightened on instinct, the way his smile tried to assemble itself before he consciously stopped it. Jungkook noticed. He always did. 3 figures waited inside. Suits, tablets, expressions carefully neutral, the kind that cut deeper than anger. The door shut behind them with a finality that made Jimin's pulse spike. "Sit," one of them said. Jimin didn't move at first. He looked at Jungkook instead, just for a second, a silent question flickering between them. Jungkook gave a small nod and pulled out the chair beside him, sitting down first, deliberately close. Jimin exhaled and followed. "We'll get straight to it," the woman at the head of the table said. "Tonight's incident is already circulating." Jimin's jaw tightened. "Incident?" "Yes," she replied coolly. "Your sudden exit, the missed cue, the visible tension." Jungkook leaned forward. "There was no missed cue." She glanced at him. "Public perception doesn't care about technicalities." "That's convenient," Jungkook said, his voice sharp now, "since public perception seems to be the weapon of choice." Jimin's hand twitched on his knee. "Jungkook," he murmured, warning and gratitude mixed together. The man to the woman's right tapped his tablet. "Jimin, you've been under scrutiny for weeks. Emotional instability, creative disagreements. Tonight confirms concerns." Jimin laughed softly, disbelief bleeding through. "You call survival instincts instability now." The room went quiet. The woman's eyes narrowed. "Careful." "No," Jungkook said suddenly. "You be careful." Every head turned toward him. "You don't get to push him until he breaks and then label the cracks as his fault," Jungkook continued, heat rising with every word. "You don't get to threaten erasure and call it strategy." Jimin stared at him, heart hammering. This was what he'd feared. This was what he secretly wanted. "You're overstepping," the woman said coldly. Jungkook didn't blink. "Then write me up." Jimin grabbed Jungkook's sleeve under the table. "Stop," he whispered. "This isn't." "It is," Jungkook cut in, softer now but no less firm. "You said don't let you lie, so I won't." Jimin swallowed hard. The man with the tablet sighed. "This is exactly the kind of emotional entanglement that complicates things." Jungkook laughed, sharp and bitter. You mean the kind that reminds him he's human? Enough, the woman snapped. Jimin, you need to decide where you stand, because if this continues, there will be consequences. The word hung in the air like a blade. Jimin felt the old reflex surge, the urge to apologize, to minimize, to take the hit alone. His chest tightened. For a moment, he almost did it. Then he remembered the sound of his name breaking through the corridor. He remembered Jungkook's hand on his sleeve, steady, real. He looked up. I'm not unstable, Jimin said quietly. I'm exhausted, there's a difference. No one spoke. You built an image and forgot there were people inside it, he continued, voice gaining strength. If the cost of protecting that image is my silence, then yes, I'm a problem. But I won't disappear to make you comfortable. Jungkook's breath hitched, pride and fear tangled in his eyes. The woman studied Jimin for a long moment, then leaned back. This will cause backlash. Truth always does, Jimin replied. Another pause, heavy, calculated. Fine, she said finally. We'll reassess, but understand this, nothing moves forward without control. Jungkook stood. Control isn't loyalty. Jimin stood too, legs shaking but unyielding. And fear isn't respect. They walked out together before permission was granted, the door swinging shut behind them with a sound that felt like a line being drawn. The hallway was brighter now, buzzing with distant voices, movement, life. Jimin stopped halfway down, hands trembling despite himself. Jungkook turned instantly. You okay? He asked. Jimin shook his head once, then laughed breathlessly. No, but I think I finally told the truth. Jungkook stepped closer, lowering his voice. I meant what I said in there. I won't let them break you. Jimin looked at him, really looked at the fire, the fear, the loyalty that scared him more than any threat ever could. You already risked too much for me. Jungkook shrugged. Worth it. The word hit harder than any accusation. Jimin reached out, hesitated, then rested his forehead briefly against Jungkook's shoulder, just long enough to breathe. If this explodes, he whispered, promise me you won't regret calling my name. Jungkook's hand hovered, then settled gently at Jimin's back. I'd do it again, he said, every time. They stood there, surrounded by noise and consequence, no longer pretending nothing had changed. Whatever came next would be messy, controversial, painful. But Jimin hadn't walked away. And Jungkook hadn't stayed silent. For the first time, that felt like enough. The news broke before dawn. Jimin found out the way he always did now, through vibration before understanding. His phone buzzed relentlessly on the nightstand, light flashing against the dark ceiling like an alarm he couldn't shut off. He stared at it for a long second, heart already racing, because some part of him always knew when the world was about to turn cruel. Jungkook's name lit up the screen. Don't read anything yet, Jungkook said the moment Jimin answered, his voice tense, breath fast. Promise me. Jimin sat up slowly, sheets tangling around his legs. You're too late, he said. I can hear it in your voice. There was silence on the other end, heavy and furious. They leaked it. What? Jimin whispered. The meeting, not all of it, just enough to twist the story. Jungkook exhaled sharply. They're saying you were volatile, that I was unprofessional, that there's favoritism. Jimin closed his eyes. His chest burned, not with surprise, but with a familiar ache. So this is how they punish honesty. I'm on my way, Jungkook said. Don't go online, don't let it get inside your head. It already has, Jimin replied softly. By the time Jungkook arrived, the apartment felt smaller, air thick and restless. Jimin stood by the window, watching the city wake up, lights blinking on like nothing had happened. Jungkook dropped his bag by the door and crossed the room in 3 strides. They're calling you difficult, Jungkook said, anger barely contained. They're calling me reckless. They're implying things they don't have the courage to say outright. Jimin turned. His face was calm, too calm, the kind of stillness that came before collapse. Let them, he said. They always need a villain. Jungkook frowned. Don't do that. Don't pretend it doesn't hurt. Jimin's lips curved faintly. I learned a long time ago how to make pain quiet. That's not strength, Jungkook said. That's survival. Sometimes they look the same, Jimin replied. Jungkook stepped closer, lowering his voice. They want us divided. They want you isolated. Jimin laughed, bitter and tired. They're late to that strategy. Something in Jungkook snapped. Stop, he said sharply. Stop talking like you're already gone. The words hit harder than intended. Jimin's shoulders tensed. You think I don't notice the looks, he said, voice rising for the first time. The way the room changes when I walk in now, you think I don't hear what they're saying about you because of me. I don't care, Jungkook shot back. You should, Jimin said fiercely, because I refuse to be the reason you get burned. Jungkook grabbed Jimin's wrist, not hard but firm, grounding. Listen to me, he said. I chose this. I chose you standing up for yourself. If that costs me something, so be it. Jimin stared at their joined hands, breath unsteady. You don't understand what it's like, he whispered. Every time someone protects me, I lose them. They get tired, they get hurt, they leave. Jungkook's grip softened. I'm not leaving. You don't know that, Jimin said, eyes shining. No one ever does. A sharp knock at the door cut through the moment. They both froze. Jungkook glanced at Jimin. Did you tell anyone I was coming? Jimin shook his head. Another knock, louder, insistent. Jungkook moved first, positioning himself slightly in front of Jimin before opening the door. A manager stood there, flanked by someone from legal, both wearing expressions rehearsed for damage control. We need to talk, the manager said, eyes flicking past Jungkook to Jimin. Now. Jimin felt something cold settle in his stomach. About what? About the statement, the legal advisor said. You'll issue a clarification, both of you. Jungkook crossed his arms. And if we do? The manager's smile was thin. Then this narrative gets worse. Jimin stepped forward. You want me to apologize for being human? We want you to reassure the public, the manager replied smoothly. Calm concerns. Jungkook scoffed. By lying. Jimin inhaled slowly, deeply. He looked at Jungkook, really looked, and something shifted behind his eyes. Fear, yes, but also resolve. No, Jimin said. The room went silent. The manager blinked. Excuse me. I won't issue a statement that erases what happened, Jimin said. His voice trembled, but he didn't stop. I won't paint myself as unstable so you can look reasonable, and I won't let you frame Jungkook as the problem because he refused to stay quiet. Jungkook's heart slammed against his ribs. Jimin. Jimin held up a hand, eyes never leaving the manager. You asked me to choose where I stand. This is it. The legal advisor exchanged a look with the manager. This will have consequences. Jimin nodded. It already does. The manager sighed. Then you leave us no choice. They turned and walked out, the door closing behind them with terrifying calm. Jungkook stared at Jimin, shock and awe written across his face. Do you realize what you just did? Yes, Jimin said, voice barely above a whisper. And I'm terrified. Jungkook stepped forward, hands framing Jimin's face before he could think better of it. I'm proud of you, he said. I don't care what happens next. Jimin let out a shaky breath, leaning into the touch despite himself. If this ruins everything. Then we rebuild, Jungkook said firmly, or we walk away together. Jimin's eyes filled, emotion breaking through at last. You're impossible. Jungkook smiled softly. You stayed. Jimin laughed through the ache in his chest. So did you. Outside, the world was already sharpening its knives, headlines forming, opinions splitting. Inside the quiet room, two people stood in the aftermath of truth, shaken but still standing. For the first time, Jimin didn't feel alone in the fire. And for the first time, Jungkook understood that calling someone's name wasn't just about stopping them from leaving. It was about choosing to stand beside them when everything burned. The rehearsal studio felt like a courtroom disguised by mirrors. Jimin stood in the center of the room, staring at his own reflection fractured into 100 angles, each one looking like a different version of himself. Strong, tired, defiant, afraid. The floor still smelled faintly of resin and sweat, comfortingly familiar, painfully honest. Jungkook hovered near the wall, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes never leaving Jimin. They scheduled this fast, Jungkook muttered. Too fast. That's how control works, Jimin replied quietly. Speed doesn't give doubt time to breathe. The door slid open. Executives, creative directors, one unfamiliar face with sharp eyes and a tablet held like a weapon. The room shifted instantly, tension thickening the air. Let's not waste time, the unfamiliar man said. We're here to determine whether this partnership is still viable. Jungkook laughed, sharp and humorless. We're not a contract clause. The man glanced at him. Everything here is. Jimin felt Jungkook stiffen beside him and placed a hand lightly on his arm, grounding him. He stepped forward instead. If this is about last night, say it plainly. It's about patterns, the man replied. Emotional volatility, boundary confusion, public speculation. Jimin smiled faintly. You mean honesty that makes you uncomfortable? A murmur rippled through the room. One of the creative directors cleared her throat. Jimin, we're concerned. Your influence is powerful. People listen when you crack. Jimin's eyes darkened. So I'm only allowed to exist when I'm unbreakable. Silence. Jungkook stepped in then, voice low but burning. You built your empire on vulnerability sold as art. Now you're scared because it's real. The unfamiliar man's gaze sharpened. This is exactly the problem. Your closeness blurs professionalism. Jungkook scoffed. No, your lack of humanity does. Jimin inhaled slowly, pulse roaring in his ears. This was the moment he'd always avoided, the one where he had to choose between being palatable and being honest. You want distance, Jimin said. Fine, but don't call it ethics when it's fear. The man tapped his tablet. There's footage. Jungkook's head snapped up. What footage? The screen turned toward them. A grainy clip played. The hallway. The moment Jimin almost left, Jungkook calling his name. The room seemed to tilt. Jimin felt heat rush to his face, shame and anger colliding. You followed me. Security footage, the man corrected. Leaked. Jungkook clenched his fists. You said there were no cameras there. There weren't, the man replied smoothly, until there were. Jimin laughed softly, broken. You set this up. Perception is reality, the man said, and the perception is attachment, dependence, a liability. Jungkook stepped forward, voice shaking now. You're exploiting a moment of care and calling it weakness. Jimin turned to him. Jungkook, he whispered, look at me. Jungkook did immediately. This is the part where I don't hide anymore, Jimin said. Then he faced the room. Yes, he called my name because I was breaking, and he cared enough to stop me. If that's a liability, then maybe your system is. The room erupted. Voices overlapping, accusations, warnings, futures threatened in polite language sharpened to blades. You're risking everything, someone snapped. Jimin nodded. I already did, the moment I chose to stay alive instead of silent. Jungkook's breath hitched. He turned to Jimin, eyes shining with something dangerously close to tears. You don't have to do this alone. Jimin reached for his hand without looking, fingers intertwining openly now, deliberately. Gasps rippled through the room. Let them see, Jimin said quietly. I'm done being afraid of the truth. The unfamiliar man's face hardened. Then we're done here. He turned and walked out. Others followed, some avoiding eye contact, some looking shaken, some angry. The door closed. The room fell silent, except for their breathing. Jungkook let out a shaky laugh. Well, he said, that was catastrophic. Jimin leaned against the mirror, knees weak. I think I just detonated my career. Jungkook stepped closer, hands warm on Jimin's arms. You chose yourself. Jimin's voice cracked. I don't know who that is yet. Jungkook rested his forehead against Jimin's. Then, we figure it out together. Jimin closed his eyes, emotion finally spilling over. I was so scared you regret calling my name. Jungkook swallowed. I was scared you wouldn't turn around. They stood there, reflected endlessly, no longer hiding from their own fractures. Outside the studio, rumors would ignite, lines would be drawn, sides chosen. But inside that room, something irreversible had happened. Jimin hadn't just stayed. He had been seen. And Jungkook had chosen him, out loud, without apology, in a world that demanded silence. Whatever came next would be brutal. But neither of them was walking away anymore. The fallout was immediate and merciless. By the time they stepped outside the building, phones were already lighting up like warning flares. Jimin could hear it without looking, the hum of outrage, speculation, loyalty splitting into factions sharp enough to cut skin. Jungkook walked beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed, a silent refusal to let distance rewrite what had just happened. "Don't check," Jungkook said under his breath when Jimin's hand twitched toward his pocket. Jimin smiled faintly. "I won't, not yet." The car ride was suffocating. The city blurred past the windows, neon and rain and reflection folding into one another, while the radio murmured headlines without nomming them. Jimin rested his head back, eyes closed, counting breaths. Jungkook watched him like he might disappear if he blinked. "Talk to me," Jungkook said finally. "Please." Jimin opened his eyes. "I'm trying to remember who I was before fear taught me how to be quiet." Jungkook swallowed. "You don't have to go back. You can become someone else." Jimin turned his head, studying him. "Are you ready for who that might be?" The question landed heavy. "I'm already here," Jungkook said. "I didn't walk out." Jimin laughed softly. "You really didn't." They arrived at the apartment to chaos waiting at the door. Messages stacked on messages. Calls missed and unanswered. Names flashing that made Jimin's chest tighten. Friends, colleagues, people who loved him and people who wanted something from him. Jungkook locked the door behind them, shutting the world out with a decisive click. "They want a response," Jungkook said, glancing at his phone. "Now, before the narrative hardens." Jimin leaned against the counter, exhaustion finally catching him. "They always say that, as if silence is a crime." Jungkook hesitated. "There's something else." Jimin looked up. "What?" Jungkook handed him the phone. "A source sent this to me." "I didn't want to show you until we were alone." Jimin took the phone, his breath stilled as he read. Internal emails, carefully worded, cold, discussions about containment, about managing Jimin's emotional volatility, about using tonight as leverage, about pushing until compliance returned. His hands shook. "So it was never about concern," Jimin whispered. "It was about obedience." Jungkook's voice was tight. "They planned this." Jimin laughed, the sound breaking apart halfway through. "All that time I thought I was failing. I thought I wasn't strong enough." Jungkook stepped closer. "You were surviving an environment designed to wear you down." Jimin's eyes burned, and I still tried to protect it. The room felt too small for the anger rising inside him. He paced, running a hand through his hair, breath uneven. "They made me doubt my own instincts, made me afraid of my own feelings." Jungkook watched him carefully. "Say it." Jimin stopped. "Say what?" "Say what they taught you to bury." Jimin hesitated, then the words spilled out, raw and dangerous. "I was scared that if I showed how much I cared, about you, about us, they'd take everything away. That loving openly would cost me my place." Jungkook's chest tightened. "And now?" "And now they already tried," Jimin said, "and I'm still standing." Jungkook reached out, cupping Jimin's face gently. "Look at me." Jimin did. "You're not weak for caring," Jungkook said. "You're powerful, that's why they're afraid." Jimin leaned into the touch, eyes closing. "I don't know how to do this without a script." "Good," Jungkook said softly. "Neither do I." A sudden buzz shattered the moment. Jimin's phone. One name on the screen made his stomach drop. The woman from the meeting. Jungkook tensed. "Don't answer." Jimin stared at the screen, then lifted his chin. "No, I will." He put the call on speaker. "Jimin," the woman's voice said smoothly, You've had your moment. Now let's talk damage control. Jimin's voice was steady. There will be no control. A pause. You're emotional. I'm clear, Jimin replied. There's a difference. You're making this worse, she warned. Public opinion is turning volatile. Jimin glanced at Jungkook, who nodded once. Then let it, Jimin said. I won't apologize for being human, and I won't deny the person who stood by me when your system failed. Silence stretched on the line. This will change everything, the woman said finally. Jimin smiled, small but unshakable. That's the point. He ended the call before she could respond. The room felt strangely quiet after that, like the air had shifted into something lighter, thinner, easier to breathe. Jungkook let out a breath he'd been holding. That was bold. Jimin laughed, shaky but real. I'm done shrinking. Jungkook stepped closer, voice low, intense. You know what happens next won't be pretty. I know, Jimin said. They'll try to break us, turn us against each other. Jungkook's eyes burned. They won't succeed. Jimin studied him, emotion swelling dangerously. Promise me something. Anything. If it gets too heavy, Jimin said softly. If staying with me starts to hurt you, tell me. Don't become another ghost I blame myself for. Jungkook answered without hesitation. Only if you promise not to disappear without turning your head again. Jimin smiled through tears. Deal. Outside, the world was already erupting. Opinions clashed, lines were drawn, names trended with fire and fury. But inside the apartment, two people stood in the wreckage of honesty, bruised but unbroken. For the first time, Jimin didn't feel like he was fighting himself. And Jungkook, watching him breathe freely, knew that calling his name hadn't just stopped him from leaving. It had started a war neither of them could walk away from. Together. Morning came quietly, almost apologetically. The city outside the window looked unchanged, indifferent to the chaos it had swallowed overnight. Jimin stood barefoot on the cold floor, watching sunlight creep across the buildings like it was afraid to touch him too quickly. For the first time in days, his chest didn't feel like it was collapsing inward. Behind him, Jungkook stirred. You didn't sleep, Jungkook said softly. Jimin shook his head. I did, just not deeply. He turned, offering a small smile. For once, my thoughts weren't trying to run away from me. Jungkook sat up, studying him carefully. Do you regret it? The question hung in the air, heavy with everything it carried. Jimin thought of the meetings, the threats wrapped in politeness, the years of shrinking himself to fit expectations that never cared whether he survived. He thought of the hallway, the door, the sound of his name breaking through his fear. He thought of Jungkook standing beside him when silence would have been safer. No, Jimin said firmly. I regret staying quiet for so long. Jungkook exhaled, relief softening his shoulders. Good, because there's no going back. I know, Jimin replied. They'll rewrite contracts, cancel schedules, paint us as reckless. Jungkook stood and crossed the room, stopping in front of him. Let them. Jimin looked up at him, eyes steady now, no longer searching for permission. I used to think losing everything would destroy me, but I lost myself first, and that hurt more. Jungkook reached out, resting his hands on Jimin's arms, grounding but gentle. You didn't lose yourself, he said. You hid, and you came back. Jimin swallowed, emotion rising quietly, no longer explosive but deep and real. I was so afraid that if I turned around, I'd fall apart. And you did, Jungkook said, just not the way you expected. Jimin smiled. I didn't break, I opened. They stood there, close but unguarded, the kind of closeness that didn't need to be hidden or explained. Outside, notifications still buzzed, headlines still argued, futures still uncertain. But inside, something had settled. What happens now? Jungkook asked. Jimin took a slow breath. Now I choose how I exist, not as an image, not as a product, as a person. Jungkook nodded. Wherever that is, I'm with you. Jimin reached out, fingers curling into Jungkook's shirt, anchoring himself in something real. Thank you for calling my name, he said quietly. If you hadn't. Jungkook shook his head. You would have survived anyway. I just reminded you. Jimin laughed softly, eyes shining. Still, you stopped me from leaving without turning my head. Jungkook smiled back, warm and certain. You finally looked at yourself. They moved to the window together, shoulders touching, watching the city wake fully now. The noise would come again. The pressure would return in new forms. Life would not become gentle just because truth had been spoken. But Jimin was no longer running. And Jungkook was no longer silent. The cracks were still there, visible and real, but light poured through them now. Unapologetic and alive. And for the first time, that was enough.